Gabriel Lemaine, aka C/, here at IndieCade East 2015, and I'm here with
Celia Pearce.
So Celia Pearce. Could you tell us a little bit about who you are and the talk you gave today?
Yes, I am the co-founder of IndieCade. I am also the festival chair, and in addition, I work as my day job as a college professor at Northeastern University in Boston.
So tell us a little bit about the talk you just gave.
The talk that I just gave was about inclusiveness and curating more diverse communities, because I feel that it's really important to develop a more kind of inclusive environment for developers and players. Right now the game industry is going through kind of an interesting moment where there's more different people playing games than ever before, but there's also a group of people that sort of wants to own games as their own and doesn't really want to share. So we're kind of in this tension between these two things, and we're trying to figure out how to resolve that.
Okay. I guess a part of one of the things that I think some people in the community outside of those that make, I guess sometimes feels that it's more like it's a thing that I grasped through your talk between the community that I'm familiar with, the fighting game community, and the kind of thing that you were describing felt like something like, say, a garden versus a furnace. And this is
I love it.
Yeah, the garden versus the furnace, where pretty much they have two different purposes, but pretty much a garden is pretty much more something that's curated in a certain way, where everything kind of has its own space in a certain way, but like it's more gently done. Whereas the furnace is pretty much you kind of throw things in and whatever comes out is kind of you kind of set the conditions, but like the pressure builds what comes out of it. And it felt, I guess, one of the tension that I guess I often feel in myself when I often view talks like this is that, like, even though I know that people who make them come from a very genuine place, it never feels as genuine as communities like fighting games, where pretty much the community is made by like this kind of furnace of competition and friendliness, where having an edge of abrasiveness is a part of what binds us together, I guess.
Actually, I think that's a really great point, and I want to be really clear that I am not advocating the elimination of environments like that. I think that the furnace environment is a great environment, and many people love to be in that environment. And in fact, if that's the environment you seek to create, I would say just, there probably isn't much you have to do, but I'll give you a couple of examples of where that could become problematic. If I'm a woman and I like to play fighting games, or I am a championship tournament player, and I go to a game, even if I am a highly ranked player, I will typically get treated like a second-class citizen, even though I compete on the same level of everyone else, purely because I'm a woman, right? For no other reason. So my feeling in that environment is the furnace as a construct is fine, but think about, are you really giving people their props for being good at what they're doing or for being part of a clique? And if they really are good at what they're doing, then I don't care if you're like a shark out of the sea or a mermaid or an elf or whatever. If you can kick ass at a fighting game, then you should be treated with respect. And this is my challenge to you, is can you create a furnace that will welcome the players that can play on your terms but don't look like you?
Arguably, that already exists within the fighting game community as it is.
Right.
There was a recent thing that happened recently where in the Smash community there was a tournament organizer at an Apex tournament named Apex, pretty much who had a history of pretty much being very sexually aggressive with certain women and even a transgender member of the community, and like he was removed from that position, and the community recognized it, and like pretty much part of the thing is that like when a lot of discussions like this happen, like we're not really mentioned. We're only used as kind of a negative example. One of the arguable things is that pretty much like a top 8 tournament will have more diversity than like in like the next 15 game journalism sites around.
Well, I think let's talk a bit about that too, because I think we want to make sure that when we say diversity, we're talking about all diversity. So,
yes.
For instance, one thing that I think is an interesting challenge and can be nuanced is that you have a lot of African American males playing video games.
Yes.
Often games that have no African American male characters in them, right? Because they're not made by African American people typically.
Yeah, like the Japanese RPGs, which has very
Exactly.
interesting ideas about who we are.
But not only that,
Okay. Okay.
but the American games also have this problem. So the challenge, I think, sometimes is that there sometimes is viewed to be a dichotomy between that and gender parity.
Yes.
So I'd like you to think about that a little bit, because I think that we can have both. You can have, I mean, even in the sense of like male bonding, you can still have male bonding and have gender parity. Like there are always girls who are one of the boys. There always have been.
Yeah, actually, one of the members of our site is this woman, Liz Lotto. Check her out.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of room there to work. It's very commendable that your community recognized that that was a problem. Many other communities, and honestly, I don't know that much about the fighting game community, but I do know about other tournament communities where this has been a recurring problem. So they should see you as a role model. And you did exactly what I was describing in my talk, which is the community came together and said, this isn't okay with us.
Yeah.
To me, that's the important thing. I've seen situations, I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone say, well, rape jokes are part of game culture. Why? Is losing the rape joke going to ruin your life that much? You know what I'm saying? Like,
I guess part of the thing that some people do feel is that like it feels externally put upon, even though the larger point is valid.
Okay.
Like that's part of the thing.
But I want to say this. If you are part of a marginalized group within another group, and I think it's really important to realize that within even a marginalized group, there are people that are sub-marginalized. So for instance, in the LBGT community, sometimes trans people are a sub-marginalized group of the LGBT community. In communities of color, often women are sub-marginalized among the people of color. Do you see what I'm saying? So my point is, just think about it for a minute. Do you have any family members who've been raped? Do you have any sisters or girlfriends who've been raped?
Nope.
Okay. Well, most people I know somebody who's been raped. For that person, a rape joke is not funny, it's offensive. So my comment to you is, do you lose that much of your culture by deciding not to offend somebody? Is that really, there's other ways you can express that without using that particular kind of humor. So that's what I'm saying about, in the talk I talk about diligence and attentiveness. It's like, you know, there are certain types of racial jokes, for instance, that I wouldn't make because I don't want to offend people, right? I don't want to hurt your feelings, and I don't make those kind of jokes. And I would appreciate it if people would not make rape jokes or gender-demeaning jokes around me. I think that's fair. So I think that that's a negotiation we make, and people go to this thing. It's like, we don't want to change. We want to keep our rape jokes. It's very important to our culture. Think about it for a minute. Is it really? There are other things about game culture that are way more important than being able to tell rape jokes. So I think we just want to think about that a little bit. How important is that? In terms of inclusiveness on events, I want to just point out that IndieCade is an indie game festival. So it's something that wants to be broad. The Game Developers Conference, which is supposed to represent everybody in the game industry, is not broad. It very clearly excludes certain people and marginalizes certain people.
Much like with the $100 price tag for the 3D pass and like.
Well, that is one of the biggest ways it marginalizes people. Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. We get really antsy about how much we charge for our events with IndieCade because we want people to be able to come. You know, we want it to be affordable for everyone. I mean, it's really important. We also provide submission scholarships. If somebody doesn't have the money, we use the submission money to pay for our submission system, but if somebody doesn't have the money, we'll let them apply for a scholarship because we don't want anybody to walk away because of that. So in terms of game makers, our feeling is that everybody should have the right to make a game if they want. Nobody should be told because of the color of your skin or your gender or the fact that your gender assignment is different from the gender of that you feel inside. None of those things should include you expressing yourself. That's, because we're about making, it's really an onus on us to be inclusive. Now, if you're a proponent of a particular game genre that tends to be exclusive, I'm not going to argue about that. I mean, those are the type of people that like to play that sort of game. That's fine. But if I'm working at a studio and I say, hey, if you made the boobs on that character a little smaller, then women who like this type of game would be more likely to play it.
Actually, that's an interesting point. Actually, I recently heard a series of essays by Liana Kirshner, where she actually she felt that one of the things that about like large breasted characters that like there are women like that, and like pretty much by rallying for, well, I understand the general point of pretty much over sexualizing character in that way carelessly, but also that like pretty much by making a character more reasonable by giving her an A cup kind of felt like a kind of insult to her. She had like a series of 5.
Can I just
yes,
say
yes.
something in response to that?
Yes.
One woman.
No, but like expressing that pretty much like I mean you're using it for a larger point, but
But what I'm trying to
yes.
say also is there is a tendency to spotlight the voice of one person in a marginalized group and say,
Yes.
right? Is that what you wanted to do?
No, the mic, because like your mic is.
My voice is
No, it's closer to him. That's why.
yeah, and my voice is very weak too, which is a problem.
good.
So here's the challenge. I'm going to challenge you with this. People often will highlight a single woman and say, well, this woman over here, she has big boobs and she wants their big boob game. Let me just hear me out. Okay. The majority of women I've spoken to over my 32 years as a game developer do not like to see hypersexualized female characters. Now, 1 or 2 women may enjoy that, but the vast majority do not. And furthermore, it's not about whether or not they have big boobs. That is actually not the point. The point is that their body is fetishized over their skills and their intellect. Now, I would love to see, to be honest, some fat, big-busted women in video games. Have you ever seen that?
Very rarely, other than possibly Borderlands and some Japanese stuff.
So, yeah. So, hey, body types, more variety of body types. Not, I have a D cup and a 16-inch waistline, but maybe I have, maybe I'm a big girl, or whatever.
I know that's one of the main criticisms of certain like open world games where pretty much the men will have varying body types, the women will just have one, switching heads, and that'll be about it.
I actually wrote an article about this a few years ago. It's called Playing Dress Up with Ludica, which I referred to in the talk.
What?
Ludica, it's a women's game collective that I co-started.
Okay.
And one of the things we did was we did an analysis of the amount of clothing worn by game characters, and we showed a juxtaposition of a WoW character, exactly the same class and race, the male and female version of this character. The female version was essentially wearing a steel bikini, and the male version was entirely covered in armor. So that is a simple indication of what I'm talking about. Why is that? Why is it that the male isn't mostly exposed and vice versa? This is really the issue. It's not whether they have big boobs or not. It's the larger issue of my body is fetishized and yours isn't. And also, with practical matter, I use this term combat lingerie.
Yes.
If I am going to be in a sword fight with you, I am not going to want to expose my entire legs and bosom to you because you will kill me, right? However, you are fully covered in armor, so like that makes no logical sense at
Game
all.
depending, because some of them will have the more Conan thing of
And if I might interject, in a lot of ways, also, it's kind of like the reverse of like British literature in terms like if you ever heard the story Hero and Leander, where Hero is more sexually fantasized, and Leander is more described. The hero is the girl. Excuse me, is less sexually fantasized than Leander the guy. Leander, who is the male, is kind of like sexually fantasized, muscular and everything like that. And Leander is described with clothes. It's the complete opposite, and that's only 400 years ago.
Right, and so actually that's a really good point, right? So 400 years ago, we were more advanced than we are now in some ways, I think. The point is, we need to have more diversity. The problem that I have is it's all the same. This is, if I wanted to tell you one thing that is the problem, it's not that there's scantily clad women, but that's all there are. There are very few. I'm actually been working with some students in Northeast.
like very few. Hold up, this is one thing that also comes to mind. Like there's very few like how to put this mom bodies, where it's like pretty much like.
Well, let me.
Or I mean
Let me even further say that I think the emphasis on bodies is the problem, right? So when you talk to women game students, there are a list of game characters that they all say are cool. Like they all love Shell from Portal, and they love Jade from Beyond Good and Evil, and they really like Faith from Mirror's Edge, because those are characters. They are characters with personalities.
hold up, Chell doesn't have that much personality.
Well, they have skills, they have chops, right? You're right, Shell doesn't have, but Shell has more personality than almost any other female game character you can name at this point. So my point is that, and she's the hero. She has the agency in the game. She's not being rescued. She's not a frail damsel in distress. She's a cyborg who kicks ass, So women want to play those characters, and guess what? Men like those characters too. So what I've found is the male players like Shell and Faith and Jade as much as the women do. So it doesn't hurt us to make women characters better, because the men like them too. So this is kind of my, from talking to game developers, which is really my main focus, not so much game players, but it's like game developers. A great example, the recent carrying on about Assassin's Creed, the new one that has no female players, characters. Let me tell you something. First of all, women assassins were prevalent in revolutionary France. There were many historical female assassin characters. Second of all, well, she's pre that.
Yeah, she's 100 Years' War is 100 years before, hundreds of years before.
In this particular historical period, it was actually quite notorious for women to be assassins. So that's just wrong. And then the other thing is the excuse that they lobbed, which was it's too hard to make women characters.
I thought that part of the excuse was their framing device for the main thing was that all characters were the main character, and they all saw other characters as the other player characters as other characters of themselves.
Right. So that's fine, except that means that there's no room for women in the game. There are many.
What about the other title that they had, where they had the Creole woman character who had to really use different social roles as play game mechanics?
Well, the point is they've had women characters before. So why did they suddenly decide not to? And that's really caused, and also playable characters, not just characters to facilitate the man's agency. But
No, that character had her own game.
Right, but what?
Yes.
Yeah, but that's what everyone's been saying. Well, you did it in Liberation, then why aren't you doing
Yeah,
it now?
you mean like a why excise a choice?
Yes, they made a good choice in a prior game. Why did they go backwards? And I mean, it's really not that hard. The idea that it's too hard to make a women character stems from the fact that you haven't made any, and if you taught yourself how to make them, it wouldn't be too hard, right? And in many ways, it's easier. For instance, if you're doing, I've actually worked in virtual worlds for years. If you're making a woman character that's wearing a skirt, you don't have to have any damn legs. There are many ways that it's actually much easier to make a female character, but they're just so used to their sort of status quo. And I mean, the same thing goes for characters of color, right? How many black characters have you seen in games you play?
Outside of, say, best friend modes and not really main characters, not too many.
Okay, and like if you play Grand Theft Auto, like how many black characters do you see?
Actually, they're main character or side?
Well, between Lamar and
Playable. How many playable black characters?
well, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas had CJ.
Yeah, CJ, he's the main character.
Franklin and Lamar
In 3 and 5, yeah. Gay Tony's Latino. Gay Tony's Latino. Yeah, that was 3.
But I mean, I bet you could count.
But if you want like environmental characters as far as plot
No,
goes,
but I mean playable characters. I bet you could count them all on one hand.
I just did.
yeah.
Yeah.
Also, the amount of characters that are in Grand Theft Auto you can also count on one hand. So I'm not sure this is where this quite works.
No, but I mean, just think about it for a minute, right? Actually, if I were to count female playable characters in games, there's probably more female characters in games than black playable characters in games, by far.
Yeah, probably
So,
yes.
like, I'm not happy with that either, right? And I'm not really happy with the way people are stereotyped of different groups, you know?
It's a weird familiarity. I mean, it's a weird familiarity with the human condition as it is, because, you know, what do you see mainly on TV? Like, especially since the 1930s, I'm taking a film class now, strong white male characters. So basically, a lot of the black characters were, dare I say it, jigaboo, yes sir, master characters that you see a lot. So.
Or later, in more recent years, they're criminals and villains, and, you know, I mean, it's just. But I don't like that either. I don't go to those kind of movies. I don't like those kind of movies. I like movies that have inclusiveness and people, you know, I think that, and think about it from a creative perspective, what a huge frontier there is of undiscovered narratives and games if you and me could count it on more than one hand. Oh my God, what a great game industry that would be, right? You know, even in the film industry, you have male, you know, you have your Will Smith. I mean, you have male superheroes and actors that are like strong male characters, right? Black male characters.
And even there's a game here, if I remember correctly. I think it's called Earth World or something. A game that's developed here. Black female main character.
Last year we had Aria Harvey here, she's actually an African American designer who lives in Belgium, and she was the keynote, and she also showed one of her games, but she always has female characters of color in every one of her games. Very rare. A female character of color, you probably can't even count it on one hand. Like, it's so rare, right? So why not? I mean, just like in the movies, you know, if you see, you know, again, Will Smith. I go see Will Smith movies. It's not like, oh, if you have a woman in your game, no guys are going to play it, right? Just like, oh, you can't have a black.
That really hasn't been the case for us.
No, of course not. And you can't have a black male lead because white people won't go to see it. That's just not statistically wrong. And a lot of marketing people, and this is really to the crux of my irritation with the game industry, to be honest.
Is kind of the safe marketing where pretty much we've known this made money in the past and not willing to risk, or what?
What's worse is it's a lie. It's a lie. So The Sims, which was the best-selling PC game of all time, almost didn't get made because EA people didn't think it would sell. And the idea of the market is a made-up fictional construct. I mean, I work with academic researchers who have proved statistically and numerically that the market construct that game marketing people work with is actually completely wrong. Like, they don't know you're playing their games. They don't care about you playing their games. You spend hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars a year playing their games, and they don't care because they don't think that you are the person they are making their game for. That's what I'm saying, even though you and I both know they're totally wrong. I know that women play games, but apparently people who make marketing decisions in companies, you know, that keep making the big busted women or whatever, they don't know that, and they seem to just ignore the facts. And this is what's driving me crazy. And then when you have a game like Angry Birds, which is a huge, huge, huge commercial success, people just go, oh, that's not a real game. Like, everybody plays it. Why isn't it a real game?
Same thing with sports games. I'm a huge sports game player. a lot of the time, a lot of my friends who play like RPGs, like, oh, that's not a real game. Why don't you can actually go play that outside. I'm like, I have a controller. It's on a game console. It's a game.
That also happens. That also happens within genres as well. Like pretty much just like an eternal battle between like other kinds of people who like the Street Fighter, as opposed to people who like Smash. And like very often in tournaments, like even in like the Smash tournaments, they have a different kind of tournament culture than the Street Fighter or more Japanese anime style fighting games.
Well, you just said something really interesting, which I addressed in the questions after my talk, which was it has a game controller and so it's a game. No. My iPad, I've been playing Monument Valley. That doesn't have a game controller, right? It doesn't matter if it has a game controller or not. And in fact, there are a lot of people that don't like game controllers and don't use them. So I think we need to really think about this. Again, like who decides what is a game and what is not a game is very political. It's very much a power play. Yeah. Like, oh, this Sims isn't a game. That's just a power play for control. So I think, we need to stop with the exclusion and saying, oh, my game is better than your game and your game isn't a real game and blah, blah, blah. Street Fighter is no less or more of a game than Angry Birds, right? They're both games. They fit all the requirements. I've written books about this. They fit the checklist. They're games. And whether or not it's a controller or a console or whatever is totally irrelevant. It's like saying Monopoly is not a game because it doesn't have a controller, right? And in the old days, and although admittedly board games have their own issues, it wasn't a thing like, oh, I'm not a gamer, so I'm not going to play backgammon. It's not, we don't need to have that culture anymore. We can have a culture where, you know what, I play the games I like and you play the games you like. And the games I like get made and so do the games you like. Why not?
I guess a part of me feels like we're not really going to achieve that. I mean, not as openly, partially because like there's a bit of like tribalism between the I guess people who like these different kinds of markets. Even though, yes.
I don't. You know what? Here's the thing. I don't have a problem with the tribalism. I don't have any problem with that at all. What I have a problem with is a group of people telling another group of people that they're not allowed to make games. That's what I don't like. If all you want to do your whole life is play fighting games, why would I care? You like fighting games, that's awesome. Fighting games are cool, I like them sometimes too. But don't tell me that I, can't make a Monument Valley because it doesn't have a controller or whatever, The point I'm making is that there is enough room for all of us. There is plenty of room, and the mainstream games are going to keep getting made. Nobody is going to stop making those games. I promise you, I go to E3 every year. It's going to be 20 centuries from now before we're going to stop seeing a sequel to Gears of War. But we can have many more different types of games. I would love to know, if you wanted to be a game developer, what kind of a game you'd want to make. What kind of a game would you want to make? What characters would you create in your game? Maybe you would suddenly think of something different if you positioned yourself as, oh, I could make a game. What would I make? Maybe it would be a fighting game, or maybe it would be a fighting game with a cool twist that no one's ever seen in a fighting game before. We've shown that at IndieCade. We've shown fighting games, but we want everybody to make games. That's all we're saying. It's just really simple. Everyone should be able to make games who wants to.
All right. Thanks very much. This has been a very, very spirited discussion.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Your name again for our audience?
Celia Pearce. I'm the festival chair of IndieCade.
This is Gabriel Lemaine, and this is from the Outerhaven.net, signing off.